Some of you may know that CLF has been working over the past few years on offshore wind, extensively involved in the environmental review process up and down the East Coast, and have been brought into the conversation, recent conversations now throughout New England that are more focused on adaptation issues with respect to what's happening with climate change, in particular the coastal erosion issues going on in Matunic. I think the question of what we need to do in a regulatory context is a big question, because there are a lot of very specific, concrete regulatory changes we might make in a whole host of areas, and to get into the details of that could probably take a long time. So I think what I would do, and I think we might get into some of that maybe with Grover, but I think what I'd do is I've thought a little bit about what I think the problem is at a statewide level, that and I'm looking primarily at Rhode Island at this point, to get us to a place where we can talk about kind of the comprehensive regulatory reform that we need. One of the problems is, although climate change is as much scientific reality as unfunded debt obligations for the state of Rhode Island, we don't seem to talk about it that way, either in the press or in our decision making at a state level. We don't have any comprehensive approach to say we need to consider both the impacts of this project that we're pursuing or funding at a state level on climate change, or impacts in terms of emissions, or the impacts to other infrastructure or to future generations from allowing this particular project to go forward. We don't do a very good job of that at a coordinated level as a state. I think specifically in the coastal context, and I'll give you kind of an anecdotal story. 2 years ago, I sat in a hearing in the room held by the Coastal Resource Management Council to address the temporary bulkhead permitting issue for Matunic Beach, to allow temporary hardening of the shore. And I was sitting next to our friend Peter Lord. And it was a highly political meeting, politically charged meeting, and emotionally charged meeting for the residents of Matunic, and for the town council and the folks that represent those residents. And the end of the meeting, despite the fact that we had reports from engineers and coastal geologists on what the inevitability of erosion was in that area, the council directed the staff to essentially come up with a plan to keep the ocean out of Matunic within 3 weeks and get back to them. So I turned to Peter Lord and I said, did the council just charge the staff with finding a way to keep the ocean out of Matunic in 3 weeks? And he chuckled and said, yeah, I think that's what they did. And that kind of triggered this thought process in me, which I'm going to share with you now, which is my perspective, that this isn't the Coastal Resource Management Council's problem. It's not their solution to find. It is the state's problem, because the impacts and the costs associated with losing homes or investing Department of Transportation funds to build a sheet pile wall in an area where it's going to wipe out with the next storm surge have economic and resource implications for every user of the beach in the state and every taxpayer in the state. And if we continue to kind of isolate the problem based on where it's taking place geographically in a state, or whose jurisdiction it is to deal with that because of the resources that are implicated, then we're going to miss a lot of opportunities, I think, that are available in terms of comprehensive regulatory reform. And so I'd like to see the conversation, and I think CLF's advocacy over the next couple of years will be to push the state into that bigger conversation about enough talk about policies and goals. There are some concrete things that we need to be doing. There are some mandates that need to happen, and every stakeholder in the state needs to be a part of that conversation.